The silence in this house is different now. It's not the companionable silence of 60 years of marriage, the kind filled with the whisper of Eduardo's newspaper in the mornings or the gentle snore of the kettle on the stove. This silence is hollow, an emptiness that echoes with the aftermath of a lie so monumental that sometimes, just sometimes, it seems impossible it ever fit within these beloved walls. It is the silence that truth left behind, and truth, I have discovered, is much heavier and darker than any absence. Today marks exactly 3 months since the phone rang, shattering the peace of an ordinary Friday. The voice on the other end, trembling and professional, told me that my husband, Eduardo Salazar, 82 years old, had suffered a massive heart attack while playing golf, that they hadn't been able to do anything, that they were so very sorry. I remember the coldness of the receiver against my cheek, the way the afternoon light suddenly turned too bright, too cruel. I remember my knees giving way and how I collapsed into the green velvet armchair, the one where he read his spy novels. The following week was a blur of grim faces, hugs that provided no comfort, and the constant murmur of neighbors and family. My son Miguel flew in from Canada with his family. My daughter Elena never left my side. She was the one who handled the funeral arrangements, because I could only stare at the black and white photograph of Eduardo on the mantelpiece. In it he is smiling, with that mischievous glint that always gave him away, a glint that now, in retrospect, feels like a mockery. The funeral was a closed casket. Due to the shock, the grief, they said, a sealed coffin that supposedly contained the remains of the man with whom I shared my life. 60 years, 60 springs, summers, autumns, and winters. We raised 2 children together. We buried our parents together. We built this life, brick by brick, memory by memory. And then, the letter arrived. It wasn't a normal letter. It was a thick envelope, made of expensive, watermarked paper, with the letterhead of a law firm, not ours. My heart gave a foolish lurch, an undisclosed inheritance, a secret. With trembling hands, I opened it. Inside was not a will, it was an invoice, a bill from a luxury travel agency, for a cruise, the Serenity of the Seas, sailing from Barcelona in 2 weeks, and the reservation was made in the name of 2 people, Eduardo Salazar and a woman named Silvia Montenegro. The date of the booking was 1 week before his death. The world stopped, the floor beneath my feet disappeared. It wasn't grief I felt now. It was something else, something deeper and more poisonous. A cold rage. Silvia Montenegro. The name sounded familiar. A vague memory of a company dinner. Years ago, a younger woman with an easy laugh and a bold gaze, one who always laughed a little too hard at my husband's jokes. Suddenly, all the little details clicked into place like pieces of a nightmare. His increasingly frequent business trips, his new interest in the gym, the way he would silence his phone when I entered the room. He hadn't died. My husband, the man I loved for 60 years, had faked his death. He had staged an entire theater of grief to run away with his mistress, to go on a cruise while I withered away in my sorrow. The invoice fluttered from my hands. I was no longer cold. I was hot, a furious heat rising from my stomach to my face. I looked around at this house we built together and saw only one enormous lie. And then, without thinking twice, I picked up the phone. I didn't dial my children's numbers. No, I dialed the number of the only person who knew Eduardo, as well as I did, perhaps even better in his darkest facets. His best friend since childhood, Roberto. Roberto answered on the second ring. His voice was hoarse, laden with that sincere grief I had believed was genuine. "Carmen, what's wrong? Are you all right, my dear?" "No, Roberto. I am not well." I held my breath. Eduardo is not dead. There was absolute silence on the other end of the line, a silence that said too much. "Carmen? For God's sake, the grief is not making me see things." I cut in, with a voice I didn't recognize as my own. "I just found the invoice for a cruise, him and some woman named Silvia, booked before his heart attack." Roberto said nothing. Only a choked sigh escaped him. "You knew, didn't you, Roberto?" The question fell like a slab of stone. Another silence. Long, heavy. Finally, a broken word. "Yes." That single word pierced my heart more deeply than the news of his death. Roberto knew. He had been an accomplice. He had been there at the funeral, squeezing my hand, looking me in the eye and lying. Why? I managed to whisper, my throat tight. He was madly in love with her. Carmen. It had been years. He didn't know how to leave you. You are his stable life. His rock. This, the heart attack, was her idea. A drastic way to make a clean break. He didn't want to hurt you so much, I swear. And this isn't hurt? I screamed, breaking apart, leaving me here thinking he was dead, mourning him. It's monstrous. I know, murmured Roberto, and his voice sounded truly anguished. It was madness, a cowardly act. But he's not the same, Carmen. That woman has him spellbound. Rage clouded my vision. I took a deep breath, counting to 10, and then, the idea formed in my mind, complete, terrible, and perfect. Roberto, listen to me carefully. I'm going to tell you something, and you will do exactly what I ask. Don't fail me again. What are you going to do, Carmen? I'm going to give him what he deserves. If Eduardo wants a cruise to start his new life, I'll give it to him, but it won't be the trip he expects. I paused, staring at the wedding photo on the mantelpiece. You are going to call that travel agency. You are going to use your contacts, like you always do, and you are going to get me 2 tickets for that same cruise, for the same date. One for me, and one for you. For me? Carmen? You're crazy. I can't. Yes, you can. I snapped, with an authority I hadn't used since the children were small. You are coming with me. You were his accomplice in the lie. Now you will be my accomplice in the truth. I need you to be there. I need a witness, and I don't want to be alone. Roberto was silent again. I could almost hear his mind working, the conflict between his loyalty to Eduardo and the guilt that must have been eating him alive. What will you do when you see him? He asked. Finally, in a thread of a voice. That is none of your business. Just get me the tickets. First class, like he likes. I want him to see me arrive. I want him to know, from the very first second, that his lie is over. I hung up without waiting for his answer. I knew he would do it. Guilt is a more powerful motivator than loyalty. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind. On the outside, I continued to play the part of the grieving widow. I accepted condolences with my head bowed, but inside, I was burning. Every tear people pitied was fuel for my fire. Roberto called me the next day. The tickets were confirmed. We had cabins next to theirs. It was terribly expensive, he said, as if apologizing. It doesn't matter, I replied. The money from the false inheritance has to be good for something. The day of departure arrived. I packed simple linen dresses and the swimsuit Eduardo had liked to see me in. I also packed our wedding photo. I was going to need it. Roberto picked me up in a taxi. He looked like he had aged 10 years. His hands were shaking. Carmen, we can still turn back, he said, his voice broken as the taxi approached the port. I looked out the window. The white giant of the Serenity of the Seas rose against the blue Barcelona sky. My heart beat with a quiet fury. No, Roberto, we are not turning back. He used up all the time I granted him, 60 years. Boarding that ship was like entering the lion's den. Everything was luxury and artificial joy, tanned people with cocktails in their hands, laughter, music, and me, an 82-year-old woman with my heart in pieces and a plan in my mind. Our room was beautiful, with a private balcony. Roberto locked himself in his, saying he was recovering from seasickness. I knew it was pure guilt. I changed my clothes. I put on a light blue dress, simple but elegant. I fixed my hair carefully. I put on lipstick, a little blush. I didn't want to look like a ghost. I wanted to look like a woman, the woman he had betrayed. And then, I went out. I walked the decks, my heart in my throat. I knew it was only a matter of time. The ship is big, but not infinite. And it happened. It was at the main pool. He was reclining on a lounger, wearing huge sunglasses, but I would have recognized him anywhere. The curve of his shoulder, the way he held his chin while he laughed, and next to him, her, Sylvia, younger than I remembered, in a ridiculously small bikini for her age, She was laughing, leaning toward him, with a hand on his chest. I stood still, watching them, watching the life he had stolen from me, the peace he had shattered, and then I took a deep breath and walked toward them. Each step was an eternity. The noise of the environment faded. I only heard the beat of my blood in my ears. I stopped right beside his lounger. The shadow I cast over him made him look away from Sylvia and look up. At first, nothing happened. Just confusion. His eyes behind the dark lenses, squinting in the sun, then a blink. Another. And suddenly, his body tensed in such a way that it seemed he had received an electric shock. He ripped off his sunglasses. His face, tanned and relaxed seconds before, twisted into a mask of pure terror. "Carmen," he managed to stammer. His voice was a wisp of air, unrecognizable. "My God. Carmen." Sylvia sat up, frowning. "Honey, who is this lady?" But Eduardo couldn't answer. He was looking at me as if he were seeing a ghost, and in a way he was. I was the ghost of the life he had tried to bury. "Aren't you going to introduce your friend Eduardo?" I said, with a calm that surprised even me. My voice didn't tremble. It sounded clear and cold, like glass. He was still speechless, gaping. His skin had paled beneath the tan. He was gasping. "Eduardo, what's wrong? Are you feeling okay?" asked Sylvia, alarmed, touching his arm. He brushed her hand away as if it were burning him. "Come on, dear," I continued, with a sweet and terrible smile. "Don't be left speechless. After all, it's not every day you run into your dear wife, especially when she's supposed to be mourning your death." Sylvia's eyes widened like saucers. Understanding, mixed with horror, spread across her face. She looked at Eduardo, then at me, and then back at him. What is this woman saying, Eduardo?" But I didn't take my eyes off my husband. Off my late husband. "She is telling you, Sylvia, that the man you ran away on a cruise with is a coward and a liar." I paused, letting each word sink in, "and that his widow has just come on board to thank you personally for the flowers and to wish you a very, very happy voyage." Eduardo finally found his voice. It was rough, torn. "Carmen, please. I can explain." "Explain what, Eduardo?" I retorted, and for the first time emotion broke through the icy surface of my voice. "How you faked your death. How you let your children cry. How you let me rot in my grief while you slept with her." I pointed at Sylvia with a nod of my head. People around us were starting to stare. The murmurs grew. "Please, Carmen, don't make a scene," he begged, lowering his voice. "A scene." I let out a bitter laugh that sounded more like a sob. "And what was your funeral, Eduardo? Was that not a scene? It was the theatrical performance of your life." I took a step closer. He shrank back in the lounger. "Let me tell you something. I'm not here to yell at you. I'm not here to cry. I've already done that, and you robbed me of even that right." I took a deep breath, holding back the tears that threatened to fall. "I am here to remind you of who you are, or who you were. The man who vowed to love me until death did us part. Well, look at that. Death was just an option for you, wasn't it? A convenience." Sylvia jumped to her feet. "This is outrageous. Eduardo, tell this woman to leave." I turned to her. I looked her up and down, and I felt pity, a deep, contemptuous pity. "You be quiet," I said to her, with a softness that was more terrifying than a shout. "You are just the consolation prize. The new toy. Enjoy it while it lasts. Because if he could do this to me, who was his life for 60 years, imagine what he will do to you when he gets tired of you." She froze, my words doing their work like termites, gnawing at her confidence. At that moment, Roberto appeared at the end of the deck. He was wearing a ridiculous hat, as if trying to blend in, but his rigid posture betrayed his panic. Eduardo saw him, and in his eyes, terror mixed with a deeper betrayal. "Roberto? You too?" Roberto said nothing. He just bowed his head, ashamed. It was then that Eduardo collapsed, not physically, but inside. All the air seemed to leave him, his shoulders slumped. His gaze, which had been full of fear, filled with something worse, shame, and abysmal shame. "Carmen, I'm sorry," he murmured, and this time, his voice sounded ancient, worn out. "I don't know what came over me. It was madness. I looked at him. At this scared old man, who no longer resembled the thin young man full of dreams I had married, and instead of the victory I had expected to feel, I only felt an enormous emptiness, a black hole, where my love used to be. "Don't tell me you're sorry, Eduardo," I whispered, my strength suddenly abandoning me. "That hurts more than the lie." I turned around. The noise of the ship flooded my ears again, the laughter, the music. I started walking, away from them, not toward any particular place, just away. I hadn't finished. I knew that. This was just the first act, but the confrontation, the moment I had imagined over and over with rage, had happened, and instead of relief, it only left a bitter taste and the certainty that even if I had won this battle, I had lost the war a long, long time ago. The war for the man I loved, the man who for me had truly died on a golf course 3 months ago. What remained here was just a stranger I was going to have to face for the next 10 days in the middle of the sea with no way to escape. And the worst part of all was that, deep in my soul, there was still an ember of that love, an ember that burned and scorched me from within, reminding me that the pain of losing him had not disappeared. It had only transformed into something much more complicated and heartbreaking. I walked aimlessly, feeling the stairs like pinpricks on my back. The blue dress which I had chosen with such care now seemed ridiculous to me. What was I trying to prove? That I could still be elegant, that his betrayal hadn't broken me. A lie. I was shattered inside, and every step was a superhuman effort. I reached the railing at the stern, away from the poolside bustle. The sun was beginning to set, staining the sea gold and blood. The salty wind whipped my face, drying the tears that finally dared to fall. They were not tears of pain, but of rage, a helpless, bitter rage. And now what? What was I supposed to do? Continue with this absurd journey, stalking them like an avenging ghost? The idea disgusted me suddenly. That wasn't me. For 60 years I had been Carmen Salazar, the faithful wife, the dedicated mother, the kind hostess. What had I become now? A shadow full of resentment. Suddenly, I felt a presence beside me. I didn't need to turn around to know who it was. Her perfume, a cheap cologne that Eduardo always liked, enveloped me. "Carmen," said Sylvia. Her voice was no longer that of the confident mistress, but trembling, full of contained fury. "We need to talk." I dried my eyes with the back of my hand and turned slowly. She was pale, her arms crossed over the scant bikini. She looked like a frightened child, dressed as a femme fatale. "We have nothing to talk about, dear," I replied with infinite fatigue. "Everything you needed to know you've already seen." "What do you want?" she spat, her eyes blazing. "Money? Revenge? What the hell do you expect to achieve with this?" I looked at her with curiosity. In her eyes there was no evil, only a profound stupidity and a primal fear. She was like a cornered animal. "Do you think this is a plan, Sylvia? Do you think I schemed all this to ruin your trip?" I let out a sigh that came from the depths. "I found an invoice your lover, stupidly, left in sight. I came on this ship because I didn't know what else to do, because the pain drove me mad." She watched me, bewildered. She expected a witch, a schemer, and found herself with a tired old woman. "He loves me," she said, with a conviction that sounded like a learned mantra. "He says he felt dead with you, that I gave him back his life." The words cut through me like knives, but I was no longer bleeding. I was anesthetized. "Life," I repeated, looking at the horizon. "Is this life, Sylvia? Running away like thieves? Faking a death? Is that what he calls living?" I turned to look at her squarely. "Eduardo doesn't love you. He uses you. He uses your youth, your stupidity, to deceive himself into thinking he's not an old man running from his own old age and from his own death." "That's not true," she cried, but her voice broke. He's going to divorce you, when things calm down." "What things, girl?" I asked softly. "My mourning? My children's grief? That has to calm down so he can make official his new life." I shook my head. "No, there's no going back from this. What he has done is unforgivable, not by me, but by them, by our children." The mention of the children seemed to hit her with force. She paled even more. "Miguel, Elena," she murmured, as if only then realizing the true scope of the lie. Yes, I confirmed, bitterly. Miguel and Elena, who cried for a father who was here, drinking cocktails with you. What will you tell them when you meet? Hi, I'm the woman your father made you cry for. She recoiled a step, as if I had spat at her, her bravado completely deflated. Now she was just a frightened woman. I didn't want this, she whispered, looking at the sea. He told me you were a cold woman, that you didn't understand him, that your marriage had been a farce for years. And then, she said it, the phrase that ignited the fuse of what was left of my patience. He said it had been over 10 years since you shared a bedroom. The world stopped, the noise of the ship, the wind, everything disappeared. Only that phrase existed, floating in the air between us. 10 years. 10 years since Eduardo had his first heart scare, since the doctors recommended avoiding strain. Since, for comfort and because his snoring, which worsened with age, he started sleeping in the guest room. A practical decision. Comfortable. It never occurred to me, it never crossed my mind. And he had used that. He had taken an agreement between elderly people, a simple matter of logistics, and turned it into proof of an emotional death. He had sold it to this woman as if I had rejected him, as if I had exiled him from my bed. The rage I felt then had no name. It was a white, blinding hurricane. Get out of my sight, I said in a voice so low and icy that even I shuddered. Right now. But now, I screamed, and the scream came from such a primitive and painful place that she flinched and without another word, turned and almost ran down the deck. I stood there trembling, gripping the railing so hard my knuckles turned white. 10 years. That was the lie that had supported everything. The justification he had given his mistress, and perhaps the one he had given himself to not feel like the villain of this story. Suddenly, a warm hand rested on my shoulder. It was Roberto. He had witnessed everything from a distance. His face was pale, marked by anguish. Carmen, I'm sorry. I didn't know she was going to tell you that. I turned to him. I could no longer contain it. The tears flowed uncontrollably, mixed with sobs of rage and a renewed, sharper pain than ever. Did you know, Roberto? I shouted, hitting his chest with my weak fists. Did you know he used that as an excuse? That he painted me as a cold shrew? He didn't defend himself. He took the blows, his eyes also filled with tears. No, Carmen. I swear. I didn't know the details. I only knew that he felt alone, that he said there was no spark left. Spark! I shrieked, and people on the deck began to stare openly. We are 82 years old, Roberto. At our age, the spark is being able to drink a cup of tea without your bones hurting. It's remembering the names of things. It's having someone by your side who reminds you of who you were. I collapsed against him, exhausted. Roberto put his arms around me, and for the first time in 3 months, I let myself be hugged. It wasn't my husband's embrace, but it was a human, warm embrace, and at that moment, it was the only thing keeping me afloat. I know, Carmencita, he murmured against my hair, using the nickname he had given me when we were young. I know he's an idiot, a selfish, cowardly idiot. We cried together, the two old friends, betrayed by the same man, and amid that pain, a cold, clear determination arose within me. This could not end like this. I could not allow that lie about the 10 years, about our marriage, to become the official truth, not for me, but for the memory of what we truly had, for the good years, the years of real spark, of laughter and children and struggle side by side. I pulled away from Roberto, wiping my face with determination. Let's go, I said. Where? He asked, confused. To change clothes, and then to dinner. To dinner? Carmen, are you sure? They will be there, in the main dining room, I said, with a new calm, and we will be there too. We are not going to hide. We are not going to eat in the room like criminals. We are going to sit at our assigned table, and we are going to have dinner, and we are going to talk, and we are going to laugh, if we have to. Roberto looked at me as if I had gone mad. Laugh? Yes, Roberto, because I have done nothing wrong. You, deep down, haven't either. You were just loyal to a friend who didn't deserve it. He is the one who should be hiding. He is the one living a lie. I took his hand. It was an old hand, stained by age, but firm. I will not allow him to steal my dignity too, or my dinners. He watched me for a long moment, and then a timid smile full of admiration and something that looked like hope appeared on his lips. You're right. You are absolutely right, Carmencita. He squeezed my hand. Let's have dinner, and if I have to, I'll break his face, even if my arthritis hurts. For the first time in a long, long time, I felt a genuine smile touch my lips. It wasn't of joy, but of complicity, of renewed strength. The battle was not over. It was just changing fields. And this time I was not going to fight with the weapons of revenge, but with the only ones that had always defined me, truth and dignity. The main dining room was a universe of luxury and frivolity that felt completely alien. The sound of the orchestra, a soft waltz, mixed with the murmur of conversations and the clinking of crystal. Every step was an effort. I felt the stares, real or imagined, piercing the back of my neck. Had they seen us? Had word of the scene at the pool spread? The maître, an impeccable man with a professional smile, guided us to our table. And then my heart shrank. Our table was not in a discreet corner. It was right in the center of the room, under a dazzling crystal chandelier, and 2 tables away, also in the center, were them. Eduardo and Sylvia were already seated. He had his head down, toying with his water glass, as if his life depended on it. She was staring fixedly at the menu, but her rigid posture betrayed her discomfort. He was wearing the tuxedo he wore on special occasions. She was wearing a scarlet-red dress with thin straps that shouted too loudly in that room. The maître pulled out my chair. The noise made Eduardo look up. Our eyes met across the distance. The few meters separating us seemed like an abyss. His face was a mask of panic and shame. I saw his eyes scan my cream-colored suit, the pearls, my hairstyle. I saw a flash of recognition, of a nostalgia so acute it was almost palpable in the air. For a second, he was the Eduardo I knew, the one who got emotional when he saw me dressed up to go out. Sylvia followed his gaze. Upon seeing me, her lips pursed into a thin, possessive line. Placing a hand on Eduardo's arm, he shuddered under her touch, as if it burned him. We sat down. Roberto muttered a good evening that sounded ridiculously normal. I straightened up in my chair, my back straight. What's so good about it? I murmured, taking my water glass. But we must keep up appearances, don't you think, Roberto? As he has done for years. Roberto almost choked on his water. Dinner passed in a surreal bubble. Around us people laughed, toasted, ate lobster. We were an island of silent tension. I ordered the first thing I saw on the menu, with no appetite. Roberto did the same. From my position, I could watch them without looking directly. I saw how Eduardo barely touched his food, how his eyes kept escaping toward us, how Sylvia spoke to him vehemently, trying to capture his attention, but he only nodded, absent, trapped in his own hell. At one point, Sylvia stood up, saying something about going to the restroom. Her departure left Eduardo alone at the table. Vulnerable. It was my opportunity. Roberto, I said in a conversational tone, but loud enough for Eduardo if he strained his ears to hear. Do you remember the time Eduardo fell into the river on our honeymoon, trying to catch a trout to impress me? Roberto looked at me, surprised. Then, a genuine smile, the first of the evening, appeared on his lips. How could I forget? He was playing the hero and ended up soaked and covered in mud. You were crying with laughter. And he got terribly angry. I continued with a nostalgic smile that wasn't entirely false, until he realized how ridiculous he looked, and started laughing too. That night at the inn, with our clothes still damp, was one of the best of my life. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Eduardo's body tense. I saw his hand, holding the wine glass, tremble slightly. I wasn't talking to Roberto. I was talking to him. I was reminding him. I was showing him the movie of our life, scene by scene. And when Miguel was born, Roberto continued, entering the game, his voice warming. Eduardo was so nervous he drank half a bottle of cognac in the waiting room. When they told him it was a boy, he started dancing with the doctor. And he tripped over a chair, I added, laughing softly. He almost knocked the poor man over. Then, when he held him in his arms, he cried like a child. He said he was the luckiest man in the world. Eduardo lowered his head. His back, once rigid, hunched. I couldn't see his face, but I imagined the internal struggle, the torrent of memories that must have been assaulting him. They were our memories, the foundations of the life he had demolished with his lie. Sylvia returned at that moment. She sat down and immediately noticed the change in the atmosphere. She noticed Eduardo's defeated posture and then looked at me with my bright eyes and my sad smile. She didn't understand what was happening, but she sensed she had lost another round. Dinner continued, but the mood had changed. It was no longer just tension. It was something deeper. It was a mourning for what was lost, fought in silence, with memories as weapons. When dessert arrived, a chocolate cake that looked delicious but tasted like ashes, I couldn't help it. My gaze met Eduardo's. This time, he did not look away. He stared fixedly at me, and in his eyes there was no longer fear or shame. There was a pain so immense, so heart-wrenching, that it took my breath away. It was the pain of a man who suddenly sees the magnitude of his mistake, the dimension of the abyss he has dug. It was at that moment, just as the waiter was serving us coffee, that Sylvia, desperate to break the spell, to reaffirm her place, did something small, but monumentally stupid. She leaned toward Eduardo and in a voice that pretended to be seductive but sounded shrill in the silence that enveloped us, said, "Honey, this chocolate is divine. Doesn't it remind you of the one at the hotel in Paris? The one from our first night together?" The silence at our table, and I think in the entire universe, became absolute. Roberto held his breath. Eduardo did not look at her. He kept his eyes fixed on mine. And then it happened. A tear, thick and heavy, escaped from his eye and traced a path down his cheek, furrowing the skin the golfing sun had tanned. He made no move to wipe it away. He just let it fall like a silent confession. Sylvia saw it. Her face twisted into a grimace of horror and rage. "Eduardo?" she said, her voice trembling. But he, for the first time since this nightmare began, ignored her completely. He broke our eye contact, lowered his head, and in a hoarse, broken voice that barely rose above the murmur of the dining room, uttered the words that changed everything. "It wasn't Paris, Sylvia. It was Brussels. And the chocolate wasn't as good as the one Carmen used to make on Sundays." And then, the impossible. He stood up from the table. His chair screeched against the floor with clumsy movements. Like a sleepwalker, he began to walk. Not toward the exit, not toward the restroom. He walked toward our table. Each step echoed on the wooden floor. The entire room seemed to hold its breath. Roberto stiffened like a board. I, for my part, placed my coffee spoon on the saucer with a clink that sounded terribly loud. He stopped in front of us. His breathing was ragged. He smelled of cheap cologne and red wine. His eyes, red and wet, fixed on me. "Carmen," he whispered. His voice was that of a drowning man. "Please, can we? I need to talk to you. Just a minute." Sylvia, from her table, stood up. "Eduardo," she shouted, but it sounded like a distant, irrelevant echo. I looked at him, at this man who had been my everything and who was now a shattered stranger, and I knew that this moment, this minute he was asking for, was the precipice, the point of no return. I said nothing. I just nodded slowly, stood up, and without looking back, followed my late husband out of the dining room, leaving behind a dumbfounded Roberto, a hysterical Sylvia, and hundreds of eyes following us, witnessing the dramatic end of a lie and the painful beginning of a truth that promised to be even more heart-wrenching. I walked behind him, feeling the fine sand crunch under my heels. No, it wasn't sand. It was the thick silence of the hallway, broken only by the echo of our footsteps. He walked ahead, shoulders slumped, the back of his tuxedo, which now seemed too big for him, wrinkled like his spirit. He didn't lead me to an intimate corner of the ship, to a discreet bar. He opened the first door he found, which led to a small forward deck, empty at this hour, where only the stars and the dark murmur of the sea parting under the keel watched over us. The door closed with a soft click. The sound isolated us from the artificial world of the dining room, the waltz and the laughter. Here there was only the wind, fresh and salty, and the truth, heavy and cold. We stood there, separated by a few meters that seemed like an ocean. He leaned on the railing, his back to me, staring into the blackness of the water. His breathing was a ragged gasp, as if he found it hard to get air. "Carmen," he began, but his voice broke. He brought a hand to his face, rubbing his eyes hard. "My God, Carmen. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry that words mean nothing." I stood still, arms crossed, not to protect myself from the cold, but to contain the tremor running through my whole body. The pearls of the necklace were cold against my skin, a mute reminder of his hypocrisy. "Why, Eduardo?" I asked. My voice sounded flat, empty of the rage I had felt hours before. Now I only felt an infinite tiredness. "Don't tell me it was because of Sylvia. That's a child's excuse. A man doesn't fake his death for an affair." He turned slowly. In the dim light of the moon and the ship's lights, his face was deeply lined, shadowed in ways I didn't remember. He seemed to have aged 20 years in one night. It was out of fear," he whispered, and his eyes, full of genuine and profound pain, met mine. For the first time in years, I didn't see the successful businessman, the family man, the amateur golfer. I saw a frightened man. Fear of this, Carmen, of old age, of death. He gestured around him, to the ship, to the sea, with a vague, desperate gesture. "All this is a farce to deceive myself, to believe I could still start over, that I wasn't an old man nearing the end of the road." "And me?" I asked. And this time emotion broke into my voice. "Was I part of that end? Was I the living reminder that your time was running out?" "Yes," he cried, with a burst of passion that startled me. "Yes, damn it, you were." He immediately regretted it, putting his hands to his head. "No, not like that. It wasn't you, it was our life. The routine, the blood pressure pills on the nightstand, the doctor's appointments, the nights watching television in silence because we had nothing new to say to each other anymore. That's what terrified me." Each word was a hammer blow. Painful, but strangely liberating. It was the truth, raw and ugly. "I'm scared too, Eduardo," I confessed, taking a step closer. The wind dried a tear I didn't know had fallen. "I'm afraid of waking up and not remembering your name. I'm afraid of falling and not being able to get up. I'm afraid of being left alone. But never would it have occurred to me to run away. Let alone like this, destroying everything in my path. I'm more of a coward than you, Carmen." "I always was," he said, with a bitterness that sounded like an ancient truth. "You were the strong one, the one who held everything together. I only knew how to make money and play golf. When that started not to be enough, when I looked in the mirror and saw an old man, I panicked. Sylvia was a mirage, a way to believe I could still feel something other than this constant emptiness." "And faking your death? Didn't that seem excessive to you?" I asked, unable to comprehend the monstrosity of the act. "It was her idea," he admitted, ashamed, looking at the ground. "A madness, a monumental stupidity. I was so lost that I said yes. I thought it was the only way out. A clean break. I didn't think about the pain it would cause. I swear I didn't think about Miguel, about Elena, about you. I only thought about my fear." There was a long silence. The ship rocked gently. The waves broke against the hull with a rhythmic, soothing sound. "And now what, Eduardo?" I asked finally. "What are we supposed to do? Get off at the next port and go on with our lives? You with your mistress and me, with what? With the memory of a husband who preferred to be dead than to grow old by my side?" He lifted his head, his eyes were flooded. "I can't," he said, with a firmness I hadn't heard in years. "I can't go on with this. Seeing you there, remembering what I did, is a hell worse than any fear of old age." He approached me, slowly, as if afraid of me. He stopped a step away. I could smell his cologne, mixed with sweat and wine. I could see every pore of his skin, every mark of the years we had shared. "I ruined everything, didn't I?" he whispered, and his hand rose, trembling, as if wanting to touch my cheek, but it stopped inches away, not daring. "You ruined 60 years, Eduardo," I confirmed, and a sob escaped my throat. "You ruined them for a lie, for an escape to nowhere." His hand fell, His body seemed to shrink even more. "I know," he said, "and no apology is enough. There's no going back." I looked past his shoulder, at the distant lights of the coast, a bright dot in the darkness. Was there a way back? No. Trust, once broken in such a way, is never rebuilt the same, but perhaps there was something else, something that wasn't reconciliation, nor revenge. "The voyage lasts 10 days, I said, looking back at him. 9 remain. We can't spend them hiding or screaming at each other. What do you propose?" he asked, with a glimmer of hope in his eyes that broke my heart. "I propose a truce," I said, with a fatigue that reached my bones. "We are not husband and wife. We are not lovers. We are 2 old people trapped on a ship, with a story too long and an ending too bitter. I propose that, for these 9 days, we be travel companions. Nothing more." He watched me, trying to decipher my intentions. "Travel companions?" "Yes," I nodded. "We will have dinner together, you, me, and Roberto. We will walk the deck. We will talk, but not about the past, not about what was. We will talk about the now, about the sea, about the sky, about books, like 2 strangers who have just met." It was a crazy idea, a madness, but it was the only way I could bear to be there without going mad with grief or rage. Eduardo remained silent for a long time, processing it. Finally, a thread of voice escaped his lips. "And after? When the ship reaches port?" "After," I took a deep breath, "after each will go their own way, you with your life, I with mine, and the lie will have to be faced, with the children, with the world." The magnitude of that task was reflected in his eyes. Telling the truth would be another humiliation, another pain, but it was inevitable. "So, 9 days?" he asked, with a hint of his old irony in his voice. 9 days, I confirmed. 9 days to say goodbye for real, without lies, without theater. I extended my hand, not for him to take it, but as a gesture of agreement. He looked at my old hand, veined, and then looked at my face. In his eyes there was gratitude, an immense sadness, and perhaps a little peace. "Agreed, Carmen," he said, and his voice sounded firmer. 9 days. He did not take my hand. Instead, he turned around and leaned on the railing again, looking at the sea. I stayed by his side, maintaining the distance of a travel companion. We did not touch. We exchanged no more words. But for the first time since I boarded that ship, the silence between us was not empty. It was filled with the weight of truth, and although it was an unbearable weight, it was real. And at that moment, after so many lies, the real was a strange and bitter comfort. The remaining 9 days of the cruise were a strange purgatory. The truce held, but it was no longer uncomfortable. It was profoundly sad. It was the calm after a lost battle. Eduardo, freed from the lie and the weight of Sylvia, who we learned had left the ship at the first port, was transformed. The mask of the rejuvenated ladies' man faded, revealing an old, fragile man overwhelmed by remorse. We no longer talked about the weather or the books. We talked about Miguel and Elena, about their first steps, their achievements, their fears. It was our form of atonement, of reconstructing in words the family he had dynamited. Roberto acted as a bridge, recalling anecdotes we had forgotten, weaving with threads of memory the torn fabric of our history. Sometimes, in the middle of a laugh over some silly memory, our eyes would meet and the laugh would die, stifled by the awareness of what was lost. The last night, we had dinner in our cabin, away from the bustle of the dining room. The atmosphere was thick, charged with the impending farewell. "Tomorrow," Eduardo began, putting his fork down on the plate. "Yes," I interrupted. "Tomorrow." Roberto looked from one to the other. "Have you thought about what you're going to do, what you're going to tell them?" Eduardo looked at me, ceding the floor. It was a small gesture, but significant. He recognized that the final decision, the right to the truth, was mine. "I'm going to call them," I said, in a voice that did not tremble. "I'll tell them their father is alive, that he has been ill, that he needs to see them. I wasn't going to deliver the brutal truth over the phone. That punishment I owed him in person." Eduardo nodded, grateful. "I'll go to a hotel. I can't go back to the house. Not yet." That night, As the ship glided toward its final port, I couldn't sleep. I went out to the empty deck. Barcelona was visible in the distance, a necklace of lights under the moon. Soon the fantasy would end and reality, hard and implacable, would welcome us with open arms. I felt a presence beside me. It was Eduardo. He said nothing. He just stood there, looking at the city with me. 60 years were reduced to this shared silence, to this last moment of peace before the storm. "Thank you, Carmen," he whispered after a while, "for these days, for not abandoning me to my fate on this ship." "I didn't do it for you," I said. "Honestly, I did it for us, for what we were, to be able to say goodbye for real." He nodded. He knew there was no reconciliation possible. The damage was too deep. What we had shared was a prolonged funeral, the definitive burial of our marriage. "I love you, Carmen," he said suddenly, and his voice sounded clean, without the burden of the lie. "Not as a husband loves his wife. That is over, but I love you as the person who shared my life, as the mother of my children, and I regret, with all my being, having destroyed that." Tears came to my eyes, but this time they were not of rage, they were of liberation. It was the truth I needed to hear, not an apology, but an acknowledgement. "I loved you too, Eduardo," I replied, "and it hurts to let that go, but it's necessary." At dawn, the ship docked. The chaos of disembarkation was a blur of suitcases and cheerful goodbyes. Roberto took care of everything, with the efficiency of someone who wants to end the agony as soon as possible. We parted on the dock with a tense handshake. He would go to a hotel to await his sentence. Miguel and Elena arrived at the house that same afternoon. Their faces were pale, marked by confusion and a fearful hope. I had told them their father was alive, that he was ill, that we needed to talk. When they entered the living room, the same one where we had received condolences, the atmosphere was so thick you could cut it with a knife. "Mom, for God's sake, what's going on?" asked Miguel, his adult voice suddenly sounding like that of a frightened child. Elena hugged me, seeking comfort. "Is Dad okay? Where is he?" "He's fine, physically," I began, guiding them to the sofa. I took a breath. There was no easy way to do this. What I'm going to tell you will hurt you terribly, and I ask you to let me finish. And then, with the simplest and most painful words I have ever had to utter in my life, I told them the truth, not with rage, not with bitterness, but with a deep sadness. I told them about their father's fear, his cowardice, Sylvia, the cruise. I told them about my pain and my rage. And I told them about the 9 days on the ship, the truce, the broken and remorseful man who now waited in a hotel to see them if they allowed it. The silence that followed was more eloquent than any scream. Miguel got up and went to the window. His fists clenched. Elena began to cry. A silent, heart-wrenching cry that came from the depths. "He faked his death?" said Miguel, without turning around. His voice trembled with anger. "He put us through all that to leave with another woman?" "Yes," I confirmed, my head bowed. "And you went after him?" asked Elena, between sobs. "On the cruise?" "I went to confront him, to face the truth, for myself and for you." Miguel turned around. His eyes were red. "I don't want to see him, not now. Maybe never." Elena looked at me, her face bathed in tears. "Is he very bad, Mom?" "Yes, darling," I whispered. "He is shattered. Remorse is consuming him." 2 days passed, long, silent days, filled with tears and unanswered questions. I gave them their space. I did not pressure them. The decision to forgive, or at least to listen, had to be theirs alone. It was Elena who on the 3rd day came to my room. Miguel followed her, his face still closed, but no longer with anger, rather with a profound disappointment. "We're going," said Elena. "To see him, to listen to him, not for him, for us. To close this." The trip to the hotel was in silence. The suite where Eduardo was staying was luxurious but cold, impersonal, like his new life. When he opened the door, I held my breath. He looked like he had aged 10 more years. He wore the same wrinkled clothes from the last few days and had the look of a man who hasn't slept in weeks. When he saw us, his 2 children standing in the doorway, his body shuddered, tears sprang from his eyes immediately. "Miguel, Elena," he stammered, not daring to touch them. Miguel entered first, rigid. Elena followed, looking at him as if he were a ghost. The conversation was hard, painful. There were shouts, accusations, tears. Eduardo did not defend himself. He assumed all the blame, every bit of it. He humiliated himself. Begged for their forgiveness, not with words, but with the evidence of his own destruction. He showed them the cruise invoice, the emails with Sylvia, the proofs of his cowardice. It was a necessary act of self-flagellation. There was no reconciling hug. There was no happy ending. But when we left that room hours later, something had changed. Miguel no longer looked at his father with hatred, but with a deep pity. Elena had squeezed his hand as she said goodbye, a small but significant gesture. Total forgiveness would take years if it ever came, but a door had been opened. A door for the truth, however painful it was. Eduardo did not return home. He rented a small apartment near the sea. I continued to live in the house we shared, but now the silence was different. It was no longer the echo of a lie, but the empty space left by a life that was gone. A space that, with time, I learned to fill with my own company. Sometimes, very occasionally, Eduardo calls. We don't talk about us. We talk about the children, the grandchildren. We are two ghosts bound by a past we cannot change, learning to navigate the quietness of a present we never imagined. The other day, walking on the beach, I saw an old man playing with his grandson. He was laughing, with a laugh that reminded me of Eduardo's when we were young. For a moment I felt a pang of pain for the life we could have had. But then I looked at the horizon, felt the sun on my face and the firm ground under my feet, and knew that, in spite of everything, I had survived. Eduardo's lie killed me once, but the truth, though painful, brought me back to life. A different life, scarred, but my life after all. And in the quiet of the afternoons, when the sun sets over the same sea we once sailed together toward deceit, I find a peace that is not joy, but is not pain either. It is, simply, the end of a long and stormy journey, and the quiet acceptance that sometimes the only safe harbor after a great lie is the solitude of the truth.